Hello, this is Andreas Sternberg for Blender Cookie. Today I'm going to walk you through how to bake out this very generic science fiction crate using Blender and XNormal. So let's start with looking at the high poly model. As you can see here, I have tried to keep my edges quite soft and wide for the high poly, because since the normal map works just as any other texture, you want there to be enough geometry for the normal map to capture what's going on in the high poly model. So you can see a lot of these edges wouldn't be as soft as this in real life, but since it's for baking purposes, it has to be a bit larger. And also it has to do with distance from the object, because in a game you might be like this far away from the object and you still want the details to show. As you can see here, the shading still looks reasonably good from this distance, so that's something to keep in mind. Also, one other thing, you can see my wireframe here. Here is a pretty huge n-gon. I also got triangles like here, and that's no problem for a high poly model, because the only purpose is to have something to bake the normal map from. So as long as it looks good on the final low poly, it doesn't matter. Also, to show you a few of the mistakes I made, that if I were to revisit this model, I would do it differently. Like this, you see the screw here. The edges are way too sharp to capture well on my normal map, and you also see that in the end that it gets pretty pixelated. One more thing is about floating geometry. As you can see, these screws here, they look like they are modeled into the mesh, but actually they are floating above it. If you see from the side there, you can see that they are actually floating above. But since you can look as baking out normal maps a bit like a camera, where the ray travels down from the bottom and up from a low poly, it will to the normal map it will look something like this. So that's something we do to actually save time. Now let's have a look at the low poly. Nothing special really. One little note that many times I actually take parts of the high poly and I remove edges and delete faces. That's how I usually create my low poly model, but for this one it was easier to start with a new cube and just model it out for a low poly, since it's I could make the low poly more complicated, but I figured I'd just keep it like this so you can see the normal map at work. As you can see here, I have modeled the handle into the side of the crate. If you take a look here, you can see what it's like. And the reason for this is it makes it easier to bake out in the end, and also easier to UV map, since I don't have any hidden geometry that will get occluded by the AO, or I don't have to explode my mesh to bake out my normal maps. And you can see this red lines here, they are my seams and actually my hard edges. because 90% of the time you want your UV seams and hard edges to share the same place, at least when making hard surface objects. So one thing to keep in mind is that when baking normal maps, you can have a split in your UVs or a UV seam and don't have a hard edge. That works fine, but not the other way around. So we can't have hard edges and not have a split in your normal map. Because then you will get errors. I'm going to show you that pretty soon. And also, if you see here is a split for my UVs. That's a UV split, but not a hard edge, because I want it to look, want the shading to look round. So let's take a look at what kind of errors you will get if you don't follow those rules. So you can see here, I'm soon going to switch it over to textured mode, but first I will show you how, if you go into the shading tab here and switch it from multi-texture over to GLSL. And also you can see my settings here. You need this enabled to be able to view the normal maps properly. So switch it over to textured. And here you see what kind of seams you will get if you have a hard edge and not a UV split. If I go into the wireframe, you see it's red here because I have a hard edge, but you see here in the UVs it's stitched together. And what will happen is you get a seam like this. And the reason for that is because the baker and the game engines, they split up your, or when you select something to be a hard seam, it actually gets split up in the game. So the way the baker sees this is like this. So here it's two edges that line up perfectly, and the normal map baker will try to write the normal map detail on the edge 2 times, so you get a seam in your normal map. So now I'm going to show you my UVs for the low poly model. Switch over to solid again. They look like this. As you can see, they are not optimized at all, really. I pretty much set up my UV seams and hard edge seams at the same time, and I selected all, hit U and chose unwrap, and I just left it at that with Blender's automatic UV packing. But it does the job in this case. So now I'm going to show you how to set up our cage for baking in XNormal. So here we have the low poly and high poly sharing the same place in the scene. That's also very important that they share the same place, or else you won't be able to capture the normal map. So here I got my low poly, and you can see it's triangulated. It's important that you triangulate your models before making the cage and before doing the bake. The reason you want to do it before making the cage is because the low poly and the cage have to share the exact same topology. If there is even a little difference, you will get error and it won't bake at all. The reason for baking purposes is the reason you want to triangulate it for baking purposes is that, say, XNormal and Blender, they won't have the same internal algorithms to how to triangulate the model. So it might triangulate it one way inside XNormal and bake the or bake the normal map with that, and then triangulate it another way inside Blender. And since the normal map is baked with the triangulation in mind, you will get error when you try to view your normal map, like bad shading or skew details. So I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate my low poly. I'm going to name it Cage Create Proper. I try to keep my names consistent in case someone else are about to pick up my project, and also to not teach you bad habits. That's not something I want to do. I have had many projects where I have like 30 pieces that are called Cube 1, Cube 2, and that's not very good. So now that I have duplicated my low poly, I go into the modifier panel and I choose let's see, Displace. Make sure it's set to normal as direction, and I'm going to move it above the edge split modifier. Because if you have it under, you will get seams in your normal map again, as I showed you earlier. So I'm going to set that 0 at first and work my way up with holding down Shift. Yeah, Shift. Just very careful. Like 0.02 maybe. Yeah, something like that. I'll hit apply, and I go in and tweak the rest of it myself with the move tool. So this is important to keep in mind when you create your cage, that you do not use anything that could change the topology. So only the move tool. Do not use extrude, knife, split, anything. Just the scale, rotate, move. Be very careful about that. Also, I try to move like the whole plane at once. You see, I could do it like this to cover it up, but then the cage will be at an angle, and also your the resulting normal might look like it has been taken from this view when you try to look at it. So I'm going to tweak it carefully. Here I'm going to choose the bottom edge only, because it's just a small part. Scale it on the x-axis by holding down Shift. And the thing is, you just want to barely cover it. You don't want to move out your cage like this, because it will increase the amount of distortion you get in your normal map. So be careful with the cage. So now find the rest of my edges. I hate when the zoom tool does that. It sort of just stops by itself. Yeah, just take this one first. Scale it in on the y-axis. Very careful. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. like that. So now I have covered everything in the cage. Let's just see how. Yeah, move this one in a bit closer. As I said, you want the cage to be on the bare minimum of how close it can be to your mesh. So like that. Yeah, just flipping it on enough to see that everything looks good. So now we're going to export out our meshes. Going to File, Export, Wavefront OBJ, and also keep in mind that I have an edge split modifier on. I had that on the low poly as well before I duplicated it. I think I did mention that, but I'll just do it again. Going to Export OBJ. Going to my XMap. I'm going to overwrite some of my files. I have an XNormal preset. You can look at the settings here. Nothing special really. And also this thing here, it's something that's new in Blender 2.69 that I want to test at a later date, because this might mean that we don't need to mess around with edge split modifiers and such, so you can get a proper bake workflow in Blender as well. So I'm going to export my cage. I'm going to hide that. Select my low poly. And you also see I try to keep the same naming convention here that I use in Blender. So that's the low poly. And I'll hide that. And let's just see here. I'm not used to working in such a small window. Yeah, that's all of the high poly. Going to File, export that as OBJ. Same settings. And that's the high poly. So let's open up XNormal. And first we'll import the high poly mesh. Add meshes. Bakes. High poly. I'll set this to average normals, because I want the normals to be smooth on the high poly. So I just do that as I think they are smooth when they come out from Blender as well, but I do that just to be 100% sure. And then I'll choose the low poly. You see I went into low definition meshes, right click, add meshes, and chose the low poly. And now you right click on the mesh and browse external cage file. And you choose the cage. And here you can see XNormal is warning you that it has to have exactly the same topology as the low poly. Okay. And here use the exported normals. Everything looks good, and XNormal checked the use cage for us. Go into baking options. I'm going to put my anti-aliasing down to 1, just so that you don't have to wait around for this to finish. I usually set it to ×4 when doing my final bakes. And here you can see all the maps you can choose. I just have normal map selected now for speed's sake. And I press generate maps. And here is XNormal warning me about my high poly might be a bit too small, but unless I get bad results, I'm not going to scale it up. There you can see XNormal is baking out the maps. And now it's done. I'm going to close out of XNormal, and I'll show you how to set up a material design blender to view your normal map. So I'm going to isolate the selection, or local view as it's called in Blender. I can't recall the shortcut for it because I have changed it myself. So here we have the low poly model. Go into materials, new, and remember that you have shading set to GLSL before doing this. New material, go into textures, new texture. I'm going to take this up a bit. Type to image, open, and I saved it under textures. Science fiction create normals. I'm going to open up that and set this to textured view. And now you can see it's all wrong. So at first when you import it, it usually has checked use alpha checked. I always uncheck that. Then you go into image mapping. Okay, that's wrong. Go into mapping, and set coordinates to UV. Here you can see that it's applied to the UV map. Going to image sampling, choose normal map and tangent, and check color, and check geometry normal, and have that set to 1. So I'm just going to drop in skylight here because now it was the shading was pretty harsh. So, like that. So here you see how the baking went. As I said, here I get pretty bad anti-aliasing here because mainly because my high poly wasn't soft enough around this area, and my UV map was pretty bad. But as you can see here, the floater works pretty well. Looks like it's part of the mesh. So everything looks quite good, I think. So things to keep in mind while doing this is always triangulate your mesh before creating the cage and before doing the bake. That's something you always want to do, or you're almost certain to get some errors. Remember to keep your naming convention right, in case someone else picks up your scene. And remember that if you have a hard edge in your low poly, you need to have a split in your UVs, or else you will get seams. And that's it. Thanks for watching.